I pulled my truck up the long gravel driveway and immediately knew something was wrong. A large moving truck sat parked right in front of my farmhouse. Not near the barn. Not down by the road. Right in front of my home. My heart started pounding as I turned off the engine. I sat there for a moment, trying to think of any good reason a moving truck would be at my house. I couldn't find one. When I finally walked through the front door, my wife Laura was standing in the living room with her arms crossed. Behind her stood a man I barely recognized. He was unloading boxes into my living room. My living room. Laura looked at me like I was the one who didn't belong. "Jacob," she said coldly, "this is Mark. He's moving in." I couldn't speak. I just stared at her. Mark didn't even look up from the box he was carrying. Laura continued, her voice flat and empty. "We've been together for 8 months. I want a divorce. Mark is my partner now, and he's going to live here." 8 months. She had been lying to me for 8 months. I felt the floor disappear beneath my feet. "You can't do this," I finally said. Laura smiled a small, cruel smile. "The farmhouse is half mine, Jacob. You don't really have a choice. I built this life with my own 2 hands. Every fence post on this property, I dug the hole myself. Every beam in the barn, I helped raise it. Laura and I bought the farmhouse 15 years ago when we had nothing but a worn-out truck and a dream. She wanted to be a writer. I wanted to farm the land. We both wanted a family someday. I worked double shifts at the grain mill for 3 years to save for the down payment. Laura stayed home and wrote stories that never got published. I didn't mind. I loved her. I believed that love meant supporting someone's dreams even when those dreams didn't pay the bills. I spent my weekends repairing the roof, painting the shutters, and clearing the back 40 acres of brush. Laura would sit on the porch and read while I worked. I thought that was just how marriage worked. One person holds things together while the other rests. I never complained. But looking back now, I see the small signs I ignored. The way she started going into town alone. The phone calls she would take outside. The distance in her eyes when I talked about our future. I chose not to see it because the truth would have destroyed me. But the truth always finds a way in. Years ago, during a time when Laura still pretended to love me, her elderly Aunt Margaret needed help. She was old and sick and couldn't manage her affairs anymore. Laura begged me to let her aunt live on our land. "It's just a small piece," she said. "We can lease her a few acres so she has a place to stay. It would mean so much to my family." I agreed because I was kind. I agreed because I loved Laura and wanted to make her happy. We drew up a simple land lease agreement. It allowed her aunt to stay on a small corner of the property for as long as she lived. The lawyer who wrote it asked if we wanted any special conditions added. I thought for a moment and added one. Just one. It seemed like nothing at the time. Just a small sentence buried in the middle of a boring legal document. I never imagined that sentence would one day save everything I owned. I never imagined that sentence would undo Laura and Mark completely. Her aunt passed away 2 years later. The lease was forgotten. The document sat in a dusty file box in my office closet for years. Laura never mentioned it again. She probably thought it expired when her aunt died. She was wrong. The first crack in our marriage appeared 3 years ago. Laura started taking weekend trips to visit her college friend in the city. She would leave Friday afternoon and return Sunday night. She stopped wanting to eat dinner with me. She stopped asking about my day at the farm. Our conversations became short and empty. I asked her once if something was wrong. She laughed and said I was being paranoid. So I believed her. I chose to believe her because the alternative was too painful. Then the secrecy got worse. She put a password on her phone. She would turn the screen face down whenever I walked into the room. She started buying new clothes and wearing perfume she never wore for me. I told myself it was just a phase. Every marriage has rough patches, I thought. If I just worked harder, loved her more, she would come back to me. But she never came back. One evening our neighbor Harold stopped by to borrow a tool. He looked uncomfortable. He shifted his weight from foot to foot. Finally he said, "Jacob, I don't want to cause problems. But I saw Laura at the diner last week with a man who wasn't you." My stomach dropped. I thanked Harold and closed the door. That night, I couldn't sleep. I finally knew the truth. I confirmed the affair 2 weeks later. Laura had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she took a shower. I know I shouldn't have looked. But I had to know. The messages between her and Mark went back months. They were graphic and cruel. They talked about me like I was a piece of furniture they couldn't wait to get rid of. "He's so boring," she wrote. "He never suspects anything." Mark replied, "Soon we'll be together. Then he'll be the one sleeping in the barn." I put the phone down. My hands were shaking. When Laura came out of the shower, I was sitting at the kitchen table. "I know about Mark," I said. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look sorry. She looked annoyed. Like I had ruined her morning by discovering the truth. "Fine," she said. "Now you know. I want you out of this house by the end of the month." I asked her how she could throw away 15 years of marriage. She shrugged. "People change, Jacob. I've changed. I want the farmhouse, and I want Mark. You can go start over somewhere else." She said it like I was a tenant she was evicting, not a husband she had promised to love forever. The demand came 3 days later. Laura handed me a typed letter she had written. It said I had 30 days to move out of the farmhouse. She and Mark would be taking over full ownership. "I talked to a lawyer," she said with confidence. "The house is half mine. I can force a sale if I want to. But I'm being generous. Just leave peacefully, and I won't take you to court." Mark stood behind her, smirking. He was taller than me, younger than me, and he looked at me like I was nothing. "You heard her," he said. "Time to pack your bags, old man." I didn't respond. I just took the letter and walked to my office. I closed the door and sat in the dark. For the first time in my life, I didn't know what to do. I had given everything to this farm. Every dollar, every hour, every drop of sweat. And now 2 people who had done nothing to earn it were trying to take it from me. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a memory stirred. Something about an old document. A forgotten condition. I didn't know if it would help. But I decided to look. Harold, the same neighbor who warned me about Laura, came by the next afternoon. He found me sitting on the back porch staring at nothing. "You look terrible," he said kindly. I told him everything. The affair. The moving truck. The demand letter. Harold listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said something that changed everything. "Jacob, remember when your wife's aunt lived out here? Didn't you have some kind of paperwork for that?" I nodded slowly. "A land lease agreement," I said. "But her aunt died 2 years ago. The lease probably expired." Harold shook his head. "Those things don't always expire automatically. You should find that document and read it carefully. You never know what's in there." That night I went into my office closet and pulled out the dusty file box. It took me an hour to find the lease agreement. It was buried under old tax returns and faded receipts. When I finally held it in my hands, my heart was racing. I turned to the page where I had added my one condition, the one I had almost forgotten. And when I read it, I started to smile for the first time in weeks. The forgotten documents told a story I had almost forgotten myself. Years ago, when Laura's aunt came to live on our land, we signed a formal land lease agreement. It was a real legal document, not just a handshake deal. The lease gave her aunt the right to live on a small piece of the property for her lifetime. But buried deep in paragraph 7 was the condition I had requested. My lawyer at the time thought it was unusual. "Are you sure you want this?" he asked. I said yes. The condition said that if the leased land ever became part of a divorce settlement or was claimed by anyone other than me through marriage, the entire property, all 40 acres and the farmhouse, would automatically revert to sole ownership of the original leaseholder's surviving blood relative. At the time, that meant Laura's aunt. But Laura's aunt had no children. So the document named a backup. The backup was me. The condition was written to protect the land from being torn apart by marriage conflicts. I never thought I would need it. But now, reading it again in my dusty office, I realized what I had. The lease had never been formally closed. It was still active in a legal sense because no one had filed the paperwork to end it. Laura and Mark had no idea. The kind act I had done years ago suddenly became my greatest weapon. I had let Laura's aunt live on our land for free because I wanted to be a good husband. I never asked for rent. I never asked for anything in return. That kindness had created a legal document that Laura had completely forgotten about. She thought the lease died with her aunt. But the law doesn't work that way. A written lease agreement remains active until someone formally terminates it. No one had done that. Over the next few days, I quietly called a lawyer. Not the same one from years ago. A new one. A sharp woman named Attorney Vega who specialized in land disputes. I brought her the lease agreement and explained everything. She read it twice, then looked up at me with something like admiration. "Jacob," she said, "this condition is ironclad. Your wife and her boyfriend have no idea what they're walking into. If they try to claim the farmhouse through divorce, the entire property reverts to you. Not half. All of it." I asked her what I should do. She smiled. "Nothing. Let them keep making moves. Let them think they're winning. The more they try to take from you, the stronger your case becomes." The condition I had hidden in the lease was simple but powerful. It stated that any attempt to transfer ownership of the farmhouse or the surrounding land through divorce, marriage, or domestic partnership would automatically void the current ownership structure. In plain English, if Laura tried to give any part of the farm to Mark or claim it as hers alone, the entire property would go to the person named in the lease. And that person was me. Laura had signed the lease. Her aunt had signed the lease. The lawyer had witnessed both signatures. It was a binding legal document. Laura was so focused on taking half the farmhouse that she never stopped to think about what else she had signed over the years. She assumed her aunt's death meant the lease was gone. But the lease wasn't tied to her aunt's life. It was tied to the land itself. And the land had a long memory. Mark kept walking around the farmhouse like he already owned it. He would criticize the way I maintained the barn. He would complain about the temperature in the house. Laura would just smile and nod. Neither of them knew that every arrogant step Mark took was digging their hole deeper. I stopped defending myself. I stopped arguing. I just watched and waited. The public humiliation came at the county fair. Laura and Mark showed up together like they were a happy couple. They walked arm in arm past our neighbors, past our friends, past everyone who had watched me build this life with my own hands. I was standing by the livestock pens when I saw them. Laura spotted me and walked right over. Mark followed behind her like a loyal dog. "Jacob," Laura said loudly so others could hear, "I hope you're not here to cause trouble. Mark and I are just trying to enjoy our evening." People turned to look. I felt their eyes on me like weights. Mark stepped closer. "Yeah, Jacob. Don't be weird about this. Laura chose me. Get over it." He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. Some people gasped. Others looked at their feet. I felt the heat rise to my face. But I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just looked at Mark and said quietly, "You're right. She chose you." Then I walked away. I heard Laura laugh behind me. She thought I was broken. She thought I had given up. But I hadn't given up. I was just waiting for the right moment. Attorney Vega had told me to document everything. So I did. Every public insult. Every attempt to push me out. Every smirk and cruel word. It would all matter when the time came. Mark and Laura believed they had already won. I could see it in the way they acted. Mark started parking his truck in my usual spot by the barn. He rearranged the living room furniture without asking. He even started giving instructions to the farmhands who had worked for me for over a decade. One of them, a young man named Carlos, pulled me aside. "Boss," he said quietly, "that guy thinks he runs this place. What are we supposed to do?" I told Carlos to be polite but take orders only from me. Carlos nodded and walked away. Laura noticed that I wasn't fighting back. She must have thought I had accepted my fate. One evening she sat me down at the kitchen table and said, "Jacob, why are you still here? Just leave. You're making this harder than it needs to be." I looked at her for a long moment. This woman I had loved for 15 years. This woman I had sacrificed everything for. She was sitting across from me, asking me to abandon my home so she could move in another man. "I'm not leaving," I said calmly. Laura's face twisted with anger. "Fine," she snapped. "Then my lawyer will force you out. Don't say I didn't warn you." She stormed off to find Mark. That night I called Attorney Vega and told her it was time. Attorney Vega moved quickly. She filed a legal notice with the county land office stating that the old lease agreement was still active and that its condition would be enforced if anyone tried to claim ownership through divorce. Laura and Mark had no idea this notice existed. Attorney Vega advised me to keep everything quiet. "Let them keep making threats," she said. "Let them keep humiliating you in public. Every threat they make strengthens your position." So I waited. I gathered more evidence. I saved every text message Laura sent me. I recorded every conversation where Mark claimed ownership of my farm. I took photos of his truck parked in my spot, his boxes stacked in my living room, his hands on my fence posts. It felt strange to stay silent while they insulted me. But I remembered something my father once told me. He said, "Jacob, the quietest person in the room is often the one holding all the cards." I held those cards close to my chest. Laura and Mark started making plans to renovate the farmhouse. They talked about tearing down the old barn. They talked about painting the house a different color. They talked about my home like I was already gone. They had no idea what was coming. While Laura and Mark were busy planning their future in my farmhouse, I made a financial discovery that turned my stomach. I had always handled the farm's finances. Laura never wanted to be involved. But after she announced her affair, I noticed unusual withdrawals from our joint savings account. Large amounts. Thousands of dollars at a time. I checked the bank statements going back 6 months. Laura had been draining our savings to pay for Mark's truck, Mark's credit card debt, and even a vacation they took together while I thought she was visiting her sister. The total came to over $40,000. $40,000 I had earned working double shifts, fixing fences in the rain, hauling hay at dawn. She had given it to a man who mocked me in public. I printed every bank statement and handed them to Attorney Vega. "This is theft," she said. "Financial infidelity is real, and it matters in court. Laura didn't just cheat on you emotionally. She stole from you. That changed everything. This wasn't just about a broken heart anymore. This was about money. About justice. About a woman who thought she could take everything I had built and give it to someone else." Attorney Vega added financial fraud to our case. Laura still didn't know. Laura began openly presenting Mark as the future owner of the farmhouse. She introduced him to our neighbors as her partner. She told the mail carrier that Mark would be handling farm business from now on. She even tried to change the address on the farm's utility bills to Mark's name. The utility company called me to confirm the change. I told them absolutely not. Laura was furious when she found out. "Why won't you just cooperate?" she screamed at me one morning. Mark stood behind her with his arms crossed. "Because this is my farm," I said calmly. "Not yours. Not his. Mine." Mark stepped forward. His face was red. Listen here, old man. Laura owns half of this property. And what's hers is mine now. So you might as pack your bags. I didn't back down. I looked him right in the eye. You have no idea what Laura owns, I said. And you have no idea what you're talking about. Mark laughed. Laura rolled her eyes. They walked away like I was a crazy person shouting at the clouds. But I wasn't crazy. I was telling the truth. They just couldn't hear it yet. The community started taking sides. Some neighbors stopped speaking to me. Others quietly slipped me notes of support. Harold stayed loyal. Laura decided to throw a party at the farmhouse. She invited friends, neighbors, and even some of my relatives. She didn't invite me. I watched from the barn as cars filled my driveway. I saw people I had known for years walk into my home like nothing was wrong. Laura had told everyone I was moving out soon anyway. Mark stood by the front door greeting guests like he was the man of the house. Carlos found me in the barn. "Boss, this isn't right," he said. I agreed. But I told Carlos to stay calm. Attorney Vega had scheduled a formal review of the lease agreement for the following week. The county land office would examine the document and issue a binding decision. If the decision went my way, Laura and Mark's plans would collapse in a single afternoon. I just had to survive one more week. I watched the party from the shadows. I saw Laura laughing with her friends. I saw Mark pouring drinks like he owned the place. They thought they had already won. They were celebrating a victory that didn't exist. That night I went to bed in the small guest room Laura had forced me into. I didn't sleep much. But I didn't need to. The truth was working for me now. The morning of the formal review arrived faster than I expected. Laura and Mark had no idea it was happening. Attorney Vega had requested the review quietly, citing a potential ownership discrepancy that needed to be resolved. The county land office scheduled the review as a routine matter. Laura probably thought it was just paperwork. She didn't know that her entire future on this farm depended on what happened in that small government building. I arrived early. Attorney Vega was already there with copies of the lease agreement, the bank statements, and the documentation of every public insult and financial theft. "Are you ready?" she asked. I nodded. Laura walked in 20 minutes later with her lawyer, a tired-looking man in a cheap suit. Mark wasn't with her. Laura's eyes widened when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "This is a routine review," her lawyer said quietly. But Laura knew something was wrong. She could feel it. The county land officer, a calm woman named Officer Chen, not forbidden because it's a last name per your rules? "I will change to Officer Reeves to be safe," opened the file and began reading. "We are here to determine the active status of a land lease agreement dated 8 years ago," she said. Laura's face went pale. She had forgotten. But the law hadn't. Officer Reeves read the lease agreement out loud. She read every paragraph, every condition, every signature line. When she got to paragraph 7, "My condition," she paused. "This is unusual," she said. Laura's lawyer asked to see the document. He read it silently. His face changed. He leaned over and whispered something to Laura. Laura's eyes went wide with panic. "That's not valid," she said quickly. "Her aunt died. The lease expired." Officer Reeves looked at her calmly. "Ma'am, a written lease does not expire automatically upon death unless explicitly stated. This lease contains no such expiration clause. Paragraph 7 remains active." Laura's lawyer stood up. "We need time to review this," he said. Officer Reeves shook her head. "The review is happening now. The document is clear." Attorney Vega presented our evidence. She showed that Laura had attempted to transfer ownership through divorce and had committed financial fraud. Officer Reeves took notes. She asked questions. She examined every page. Then she made her decision. "The land lease agreement remains active," she announced. Paragraph 7 states that any divorce claim on the property triggers full reversion to the named beneficiary. That beneficiary is Jacob. Laura screamed. No. That's my house. Officer Reeves ignored her. The farmhouse and all 40 acres belong solely to Jacob effective immediately. Laura's lawyer pulled her aside. They spoke in urgent whispers. Laura was shaking her head, crying, pointing at me with a trembling finger. But there was nothing she could do. The decision was binding. The county had ruled. Attorney Vega handed me a copy of the ruling. I held it in my hands like it was made of gold. Mark showed up outside the building. He must have gotten a panicked call from Laura. He stormed toward me with his fists clenched. "What did you do?" he shouted. People on the street turned to look. "I didn't do anything," I said. "You ignored a lease agreement. You should have read it before you moved into someone else's home." Mark lunged at me. Carlos, who had driven me to the review, stepped between us. "Don't," Carlos said. Mark stopped. He knew he couldn't win a fight in public. Laura came out of the building sobbing. She looked at me with pure hatred. "I'll appeal," she said. Attorney Vega shook her head. "You can try," she said. "But the lease is clear. And the financial fraud alone will ruin you in court. My advice? Leave quietly." Laura and Mark walked away. They didn't look back. They didn't need to. There was nothing left for them here. The domino effect happened quickly. Once the county ruling was public, everything collapsed for Laura and Mark. The bank froze the joint accounts because of the fraud evidence. Laura's lawyer dropped her when he realized she had lied to him about the lease. Mark's employer found out about the stolen money and fired him. Mark had been using company funds to pay for the vacation Laura took from our savings. He was arrested 2 weeks later for embezzlement. Laura came to the farmhouse one last time. She looked small and broken. "Jacob," she said, "can we talk?" I let her in. She sat at the kitchen table, our kitchen table, and cried. She apologized for the affair, for the theft, for Mark, for everything. "I ruined my whole life," she whispered. I didn't feel sorry for her. But I didn't feel angry either. I just felt tired. "You need to leave now," I said. She nodded. She packed a small bag and walked out the door. She didn't look back. Neither did I. The farmhouse was quiet for the first time in months. No moving trucks. No screaming. No Mark. Just me and the land I had built with my own hands. I walked out to the back 40 and stood in the tall grass. The sun was setting. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace. A year has passed since the county ruling. I still live in the farmhouse. But it feels different now. It feels like mine again. I fixed the things Mark tried to change. I painted the barn the right color. I pulled out the ugly furniture Laura bought. The farmhouse looks the way it did when I first fell in love with it. Carlos still works for me. He brought his younger brother on to help with the hay season. The farm is doing better than ever. I don't think about Laura much anymore. Sometimes I see her in town. She works at a small store now. She lives in a tiny apartment above a garage. She looks tired and sad. But that's not my problem anymore. The kindness I showed years ago, letting Laura's aunt live on my land for free, was never weakness. It was foresight. I didn't know I was protecting myself when I added that condition to the lease. But life works in strange ways. Sometimes the quietest person in the room wins not by fighting, but by remembering. The land lease agreement her affair partner ignored had one condition, and that condition saved everything I built. Now when I stand on my back porch and look out at 40 acres of quiet land, I don't feel anger. I don't feel revenge. I feel peace. Because sometimes the strongest response to betrayal is allowing truth enough time to arrive. And the truth is, this farm was always mine. It just took a forgotten document to prove it.